over the last few episodes, been talking about how the different mechanics in video games can lend themselves to real-life applications. For example, socializing, I think was the last one that I really touched on, but also just seeing how if any of the sort of actions or things you do or ways you think in a game can bleed over into the real world and be a benefit. And something that I realized while playing Destiny actually was just how you lead when you're looking down the iron sights of a gun. And I think the same thing could be said, I don't play Call of Duty, but I imagine the same thing could be said for that kind of game, or Battlefield, or any kind of first-person shooter. I do recall there was a study a while ago where they were comparing the reaction times of people who were tested after playing prolonged sessions of Tetris, and then others who played, I actually think it might have been Call of Duty, but it was a first-person shooter. And they found, based on that study, and there probably have been others since then, that the reaction times of the people who played first-person shooters were much, much higher. Obviously, I mean, it makes a lot of sense because you've got a lot of things coming at you quickly. You don't have a lot of time to think things through. You have to make a split-second reaction, Twitch gaming, and because of that, I mean, a very basic application of that, which I can attest to, would be, let's say you're doing something at a kitchen counter and a cup or a bottle falls off and your hand just shoots out and grabs it and you catch it before you even think about catching it. It's that kind of thing. Going off of that, playing Destiny, I realized how I was leading with the iron sights. Someone would be running or zigzagging at me or jumping or gliding through the air. And the way I would lead with them, oftentimes, people who haven't played a game like that much or who maybe aren't very good will aim exactly where they are. And if you've played any FPS games, you know if you aim exactly where someone is and they're not stationary, you will miss because they're moving. But if you're a little bit more seasoned or intuitive to that kind of game, you're going to lead them. What that means is you've got the iron sights, or your sights in general, just a little bit ahead of them. So your shot is going to land where they will be, not where they are. You're always trying to hit where they will be, because that way they're literally walking into your path of fire and they're connecting with your shot in movement. Again, if you try to shoot where they are, it's going to miss because they won't be there. It's the difference of a split second, but that's all the time it takes for you to either land that headshot or miss entirely and then get shot yourself. And it occurred to me, I'm not sure how practical an application this would be, say, in the most obvious transitions, say, in a practical battlefield scenario in an actual military theater of war. But I'm really curious to see if that kind of reaction time and the neural recognition for leading a moving target carries over into something like hunting, which is something that I've been looking into myself for a myriad of different reasons. Just on a little tangent here, like I've got a family history of some rather successful hunters, and from everybody that I've spoken to about it, I've taken away two things. One, it's a very fulfilling pursuit in that you are using all parts of the animal because you're going to be eating it, and it's a sort of calming meditative experience where perhaps you're doing it by yourself, but even if there's someone with you, you're out in nature. It's a very natural reconnection with a world that we are such a part of, and a way to disconnect from a very heavily connected, socialized, technologically enhanced society that we live in day to day from 9 to 5. On the other side of that, there's also this idea of removing a dependency on, say, like supermarket meat. Not that there is anything wrong with that. They are there for a reason, and let's be honest, if we didn't have it, most of us would be horribly malnourished. But I mean, you know, this thought that you could be getting your meat from the outside world, from the wild, there's less of a chemical component. I mean, of course, you know, deer could eat grain that's been enhanced chemically in some way, pesticides or whatnot from a farmer's field. This is an aside tangent, but I'm explaining this to lead into my next point. You've got a very natural, readily available source of meat that requires a high amount of skill to attain, so it's very satisfying and you know exactly where your food came from, which I think is an incredible thing. Leading that back into my main point, I'm curious to see if the sort of brain recognition, the way your mind has been conditioned to follow and lead targets, where to place your shots, how would that carry over into that kind of scenario? Think about the practical application of this. There's a couple things that are going to take a while to get used to and become comfortable with. Namely, there is the very real loud sound of a firearm going off. A rifle is a heck of a lot louder than your headphones. Secondly, there's the physical element, the recoil. You're going to have that force traveling out of the gun with the explosion of the gunpowder and the bullet being projected down the barrel. But there's also the force that comes out through the butt of the gun into your shoulder, and it's going to be pushing you back. It's going to take a while to get used to that if you've never had any kind of experience handling a firearm before. But once you get used to those two things, and of course then if you're hunting, there's the dressing and cleaning of the animal, separate notion. Maybe not, but I'll stick to this point. Once you get used to those two very real physical applications of operating a firearm, I'm wondering just how well of a shot a person would be. Like, for example, take somebody who has never played a video game before in their life or had any kind of practical experience with that kind of way of thinking and reaction time. All of their experience comes solely from the operation of firearms and the application of them in both aiming and in hunting. Then compare that with somebody who has limited to no experience with firearms outside of playing games for years. They're really good at it. Whether it's Call of Duty or any kind of first-person shooter, the ideas and the basic methodology when it comes towards aiming and leading your shots is something that is just second nature to them and they don't even need to think about. Take those two people side by side. Get the guy who's only done games up to the point where he's very comfortable with using a rifle, and then compare the two shots and see how well they line up in terms of accuracy and landing hits on a moving target like a deer. I think it would be an interesting thing to see, and I'm sure there's definitely got to be other material written about it, and maybe even some studies done, but that would be a really interesting way to... All right, let's say that actually works, and you're someone who's interested in getting involved in hunting very proactively, such as myself. I'm wondering how much of a increase in skill, or maybe that's not the right way to put it, how much time you save in terms of that idea of leading the shot and how that carries over into the practical application of hunting. You know what I mean? Like, let's say if you had no kind of experience to that sort of thing, it would take you 5 years. But let's say you'd been playing games for an equal amount of time, and then you step into this different theater of thinking, but with things you can carry over from your gaming experiences. Would that cut down your time? Now, hypothetically, maybe instead of taking 5 years to get to a point where you can do that effectively, it only takes you 3. Or maybe it cuts a time in half. Maybe it's 2.5 years. I'm curious to see how that carries over, if there is any kind of carryover at all. And if nothing else, I think it's a really interesting idea to consider, because let's say that is the case, and you can prove that there is a definite benefit towards doing that in a digital virtual environment and then carrying it over into a real applied physical environment. Think about all the other ways you could do that. Off the top of my head, I'm thinking of like a show like Old Noah Zero, where a doctor's idea for treating a soldier's PTSD was to put him in a virtual simulated environment that was as real as they could get to the situation that had caused him PTSD and have him relive it over and over again, which is traumatic and kind of torturous, but the thought behind it was, if we expose you to this event over and over and over again, you're going to develop a tolerance and a toughness, and you will either come to grips with what you are suffering with, or you're going to become so desensitized and numb that it's not going to bother you anymore. Those kinds of applications. I'll try to think of other ones as I play games. And as you play games too, I'd love to hear if you have any sort of ideas on applications like that have carryover. We've discussed socializing for one, and I think this is a very attainable, realistic branch off from that school of thought, where there are things you can do in a digital environment that could have a definite benefit and carry over into a real one. If nothing else, I hope I'm giving some university student out there who maybe happens across this some ideas on a study to run. I would be absolutely over the moon to see something like this done. And again, it may have been. I think I'm going to have to do one of these episodes where I just go on a Google search and say, like, here's what I found on things I've talked about. Yes, they've been done. Yes, they work. Or no, they haven't. Or yes, they were. And no, they didn't. You know what I mean? Anyway, love to hear your thoughts as always. And until next time, my name's Rye. You guys take care of yourselves.